What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Turn on the Jets Live. I'm your host, Zantz, joined by my co-host, Steven Russo. Russo, it's good to be back again. I know we had a lot of fun at our first show back after a long hiatus. How's everything? I know you were okay with the earthquake, but I know a lot of people in the tri-state area definitely felt it like myself. But how's everything?
Yeah, we're good, man. Didn't feel it up here in central New York, but glad you guys are all okay. But yeah, I mean, it's never a dull moment. We're excited. Let's we'll dive in. We'll talk some Diggs trade, the Reddick trade, and what the Jets are looking like coming up on draft season here. So go ahead, man, kick it off.
Yeah, I know that like we typically don't talk about other teams when we do this show. It's more about like the matchups when we're leading up to the game. Like, what's the X factors? Who are the guys who scare us, and whatnot. But this Diggs trade, like, yes, I know that he's not the player that he used to be, but it really, to me, signals a huge opportunity for the Jets because to me, you look at the Bills roster, and I know this has been a big topic of conversation across Jets Twitter. I know Badlands and I think Will's pod talked about it, just like about where the Jets roster stacks up in the division. But like you look at it, and I know Zach Rosenbaum, the Athletic, also wrote about this. Like the Jets on paper, and I know you want to talk about best roster since when, so we can kind of talk about this and then go into best roster since when. The Jets on paper, to me, top to bottom, are the best roster in the division. But it doesn't necessarily mean anything because it's on paper, and we know that that's literally means nothing when it comes to sports. You could talk about like hypotheticals. You could talk about if this goes right. But to me, I mean, I think the quarterback variance is obviously huge because number one, we don't know how Rodgers is going to look. We assume he's going to look good, but like again, we can't guarantee it. And we know Josh Allen's the best quarterback in the division. We know Tua is a pretty solid quarterback, but he has his flaws. And then New England right now is Jacoby Brissett. You'd assume that there's a rookie in the fold, but like to me, if like you're getting Aaron Rodgers at 85% of the player that we think he's going to be, how can you argue this, right? Am I crazy here?
No, I don't think you are. And I think it definitely opens up a door for the Jets where we've seen this. Now, we've been seeing it throughout this offseason, right? I think obviously the Dolphins have taken a step back and their quarterback clearly has health questions, right? But they managed to keep him upright for the full year last year. But they've definitely gotten worse. They lose Xavier Howard. They lose Christian Wilkins. They lose Robert Hunt. Their offensive line was questionable at best last year. Tyreek Hill is on the other side of 30. There's a lot of question marks in that team now. And they honestly, when you look at their performance overall in 2023, they came out of the gates very hot, faltered a little bit down the stretch, losing the first round of the playoffs. The Bills obviously have taken a step back. And when you look at that situation with Stephon Diggs, like, yes, he wasn't as much of a factor down the stretch. But again, and you and I just talked before the show, he's still a top 10, top 12 wide receiver in this league, no question. But it makes you wonder, like, how bad this situation must have been in reality in Buffalo for them to take the compensation that they did, eat $31 million in dead cap, trade him to a AFC rival. All of those things combined, like how bad must it have been? And to leave themselves with the wide receiver room that they have. They are obviously hoping for a big step forward from Shakir. They let Gabe Davis go. They got Mac Hollins. They signed Curtis Samuel. I think they are hoping to, maybe get big production out of the tight ends here. But again, and Josh Allen is in a class of his own, really. But when you look at it, yeah, I mean, I think this tees up for a wide open AFC East because the Patriots are going to be a non-factor. There's no question, regardless of who they draft at quarterback. They're clearly in a rebuilding state right now. So it's a 3-horse race between the Jets, Dolphins, and Bills. And, you got to say it's at least tied. And maybe the Jets are leading the charge because, and we can kind of pivot to this a little bit. On paper, when you look at it, I mean, and health is always going to be a question mark, right? Health is always an if. But on paper, this is the most talented Jets roster that I've seen. And when you look at roster, like not coaching staff, but since 98, right? And I think I can say that relatively confidently because knowing what 98 already played out. But if you look at it from a quarterback perspective, Vinny Testaverde had statistically the best year that any Jets quarterback has ever had. He threw 29 touchdowns and 7 picks. Rodgers puts that up every year without blinking an eye.
Yes.
Right. So if you can get that level of production from Aaron Rodgers, and I think really top to bottom, this may be a more talented roster than there. I mean, again, health is a big if. There's a lot of things that could happen. However, I do think from a quarterback perspective, when you look across the rest of the positions, especially the more important positions, you look at left tackle, you look at corner, you look at receiver, you look at running back, like the Jets are very top heavy and they're very talented at at those positions. So I kick it over to you and say, what do you think, man?
Yeah, I think you had a lot of great points. I know that 98 team definitely has a bigger place in your heart than me. I was a lot younger. I wasn't really focused on the
Okay,
Jets
a
as
lot
much.
younger. Let's pump the brakes here, Stevie. All right, jeez.
Fine. All right. Anyway, I digress. But to me, I don't remember it as much, is what I'm trying to say. So 2010 is where my head goes because that's the best Jets team that I've seen in my lifetime that I can like vaguely remember. I mean, not vaguely, I can perfectly remember, excuse me. And I think the difference, though, between that roster and this one is that the quarterback was considered really the thing that was holding us back. And, health is a huge thing. So that's something I have to keep in mind. But like Aaron Rodgers is not what Mark Sanchez was. Like, even if he's not even the guy that we hope he's going to be, he's going to be better than that just because of what he's been able to accomplish in his NFL career and just his IQ and even just like almost all of his arm talent being there. So that to me is huge, especially in this, NFL where the quarterback is so important. So to me, like, I think it's the most talented team on paper I've seen since 2010. And you can make an argument it's the most talented team really in the modern era for the Jets because there's just basically, with the exception, I would say safety, and it's not horrible, depth at linebacker, a little bit depth in the interior on defense, like behind Quinnen. And I would say right now, wide receiver depth and running back depth, this team is great. Like the starters are good. Like, you feel good about a lot of things. Obviously, there's questions with the offensive line. You'd assume they're going to add a piece there, but like, I'm excited. And I really feel like as long as they can stay, I would, 80% healthy, for most of their key players or 85% healthy, which is, that means you're missing maybe a core guy or two. But again, I still think this team has the potential in the division, and I think that's where their sights should be. It shouldn't just be, sneaking into the playoffs. I mean, if they make the playoffs, they're still going to be happy. But I think with how the division has regressed, with how New England has shown limited signs of really wanting to contend this year, you have to think that that's where they need to be. And, hosting a home playoff game would just be awesome. It's been so long. It's been since 2002. So it'll be 22 years or even really – I guess 22 years because it was 2003 was when it actually happened in January. So, yeah, I'm excited. But again, a lot of ifs here. And we'll transition to the Reddick trade, even though I know there's been a lot of time to digest this. I'm sure a lot of people talk about nauseum. But, like, for me, I didn't like the route of how they got there. But, again, if you just look at it of adding the player and not thinking about the player they let go, thinking about, you have to pay this guy, whatever – it's a home run. I mean, this guy is like perfect for the system. He's basically what you hoped that Bryce Huff would become as he developed into his prime. And I know, he's 29, turning 30, so you can have a little bit of concerns, and I get that, but he's been durable his whole career. He, has shown 4 straight years, and with different teams, may I add, that he's able to get double-digit sacks. So to me, it's like it's a no-brainer, and he does everything that you want Huff to be able to do. And yeah, I get it. Youth is on his Huff side, so you'd feel that you're betting better. You're betting long-term that he's the better player. But in an all-in year, I would say it's like an A- just because of the like how they got there. But like an A+ would be if like they had Huff still, or like they traded Huff and got assets back. I don't count the compensatory pick that they're going to get for him.
Yeah, I agree. I think what you like is this regime's ability to course correct this year and their ability to kind of self-reflect and see like they've missed here. And I think they were honest about that. And I think once they didn't re-sign Bryce Huff during the season, I think they knew it was going to an end. It was coming to an end. And clearly he wanted to go to a place where he was going to obviously get paid and be able to play more. And I'm not sure if the Jets saw him that way. I'm not sure if they miscalculated. We're never going to know. But clearly they're upset that they let him walk, and they're upset that they didn't get a deal done last season. However, it's gone. It happened. So how do you move forward? And the Jets clearly had to address pass rushers. So when you and I recorded 2 weeks ago, we were talking about they were in the midst of courting Jadeveon Clowney. And he went to Carolina for 2 years, $20 million, which I think it was smart on the Jets' part to not go that route. And they pivot and I think get a better player, a more durable player, a more productive player in Hassan Reddick that rounds out their D-line and their edge group nicely. And I think that's exactly what we were looking for, was someone to take over that Bryce Huff role and those Bryce Huff snaps. So now instead of relying on Will McDonald to fill in that gap, you're kind of having Will McDonald replace maybe Carl Lawson snaps, and you have Jermaine Johnson hoping to take that another year 3 leap, and Hassan Reddick filling in the Bryce Huff role, which we've said, many times, this defense, you can touch it and be totally fine, leaving it alone and address the offense. And they lost Bryce Huff, which was a key piece. However, you have to address the offense, but addressing the loss of Bryce Huff with Hassan Reddick is a nice fill, and they still have some moves to make. So let's see how the rest of the offseason shakes out in the draft. But I think it was a home run move. It was a great way to course correct there.
Yeah, we're not going to feel, concerned that they're betting so much on Will McDonald, who I know obviously has a lot to prove, but I think he showed signs of life towards the end of the season. But yeah, I think it's a win-win. I mean, yeah, I'll miss Bryce Huff. He was a really fun player to watch. I felt like he gave it his all, and he always came up in a big spot, especially in 2023. I mean, having a career season, but you move on. It's the nature of the NFL. You can't keep everybody. And I think that they know that they miscalculated his value, and really they probably should have got it done sooner, but they fixed the mistake instead of just like going into the, training program and then going into training camp. It's just like, they're kind of just tossing their hands up like we've seen them do in the past. So,
and the other part of this is, and I want to give them credit for it, and honestly, it's kind of like a double-edged sword here, but
yeah.
The early stages of free agency, I think all of Jets fans were kind of in a bit of a panic, and do they get that this is an all-in year? Do they get how
yes,
this window is closing? And I think the moves obviously suggest that they understand that, and they're going all in for this 1-2 year window with Aaron Rodgers and with this group. And it seems like a no-brainer, but in today's NFL and us being Jets fans too, you have to at least give them some credit for that. They are making moves that say that they understand the magnitude of their decisions and how important this season is. And they're making moves to reflect that. I mean, they haven't signed anyone to more than 2 years, really. I mean, they're going all in on this window with Rodgers, with this group. And, you got to give them at least a little bit of credit for that. I think that's something that, after day 1, day 2 of free agency, we're all pretty thankful for now that we're 3 weeks past it.
Yeah, totally. I want to move to the draft, and then we'll talk about some other moves that they can make. But I feel like the wind is definitely pulling in a direction that they might trade back. I feel like there's going to be a lot of different things we hear the next 3 weeks. I feel like this is like the time of year where there's so many lies that get out there on social, like, agendas that are being put out by front offices through the guys in the media. I think, they have to be prepared to trade back is really the way I would put this. I'm open to a lot of different opportunities. It's basically, as long as they don't take a defensive player, I don't really care what they do. I mean, I would be frustrated if they took a quarterback. I don't think that they're going to. I think that they will later in the draft. I mean, it just doesn't make sense with what their timeline is. That would make me feel like they don't know what they're doing. But again, like if they saw it as an opportunity to groom the guy behind Rodgers, I would sell myself on it. But I feel like at this point, it's going to probably be Brock Bowers or a receiver that's there. So there's a lot of different things you're hearing about, how many quarterbacks are going in the top 10, how many could go in the top 5 for that matter. And then obviously that has a lot of variance of like who's going to be available at 10. I would imagine that Marvin Harrison, Malik Neighbors are probably off the board, and same thing with Joe Alt. So it comes down to if Atlanta takes a pass catcher, which it seems like they've always been linked to Dallas Turner. Chicago, I think, could go in a number of directions. They could take an offensive lineman. They could take a guy like Rome Odunze if he's there. But to me, it's like, I feel like it comes down to, Rome Odunze, Brock Bowers, Olufashanu, and what's his face? I can't.
Fontenot?
Oh, not Fontenot, but he's a possibility. Fuaga. So
Fuaga. Yep.
I couldn't think of the last offensive lineman, but I think those would be the 4 that I would probably keep an eye on if they stay at 10. If they trade back, then I think Fontenot is definitely a possibility. I don't think Brock Bowers would be. I think somebody would probably trade up for him, but what do you think? Like, would you have a preference if staying at the pick? Do you think that they should trade back or even trade up? I know that's been something that's been floated out as well. Don't see it just because they don't have the assets this year to do it. I think they'd rather recuperate a second-round pick than to get rid of a future second-round pick, given the fact, they need assets for the future one if this window doesn't work.
Yeah, so I'm in the same boat as you, really, and I'm in the same camp where as long as – and I would say – I wouldn't be happy if they took a quarterback. I don't think I'd be able to sell myself on it, especially considering what I just said about the regime and knowing they're in an all-in year here. So I can't really sell myself on that. But as long as it's not a defensive player, I'm going to be happy. Now, what I will say is that changes if they are able to trade back and recoup that second-round pick and then use that second-round pick on a pass catcher or something like that, then I'd be totally fine. I think that's the beauty of what they've done this offseason is they've put themselves in a position to where they can be flexible and they will kind of have their pick of the litter. So we'll see how the board breaks. And, to your point, like I've seen mock drafts where you got the quarterbacks going 1 through 4 with Minnesota jumping up to trade with Arizona and grab JJ McCarthy at 4. And I mean, that changes how the board breaks overall. It also changed the landscape for what a trade market looks like for the Jets at 10 too, because I don't think anyone's coming up to 10 to draft Penix or Bo Nix, but we'll see. Maybe some of those other players that fall, maybe someone else wants to trade up. So again, I think it all depends on how far they trade back, what they feel like obviously they can get. If they feel like at 10, okay, maybe this player is not worthy, but if I go back to the 15 to 18 range, I can still grab, this group of players. But ultimately, I'm going to be happy no matter what they do. For the most part, I say that, comes with an asterisk a bit, but if they end up, if they stay put and they take Bowers at 10, I think I'll be happy. If they stay put and they take Rome Odunze at 10, I think I'll be happy. If they stay put and they take, a future left tackle like a Fashanu, I think I'll be happy with that. It will come with a contingency as to what they do at that third wide receiver or third pass catcher spot, we will say. But ultimately, I can't see a scenario where they really botched this to the level that they, I don't want to say they botched it last year, but I think they were caught a little off guard last year with that McDonald pick. So I assume and I would hope that they'd be a little bit better prepared this year. And honestly, any realistic scenario with what they do at 10, I think ultimately I'm going to be pretty happy with. And for some reason, the longer in this process we go and the closer we get to the draft, the more excited I do get about the potential of Brock Bowers. I mean, the Jets just have never had a tight end like that. I don't know, ever, really. And I think Conklin is a solid tight end. I'm actually excited to see what he can do with Aaron Rodgers at quarterback. But the idea of him and Brock Bowers, you got Mike Williams on the outside, Garrett Wilson on the other side. I mean, that just that really excites me. I think Brock Bowers could be a very exciting pick. But I could say the same thing about Rome Odunze. And having him be your wide receiver 3 he's got size, he's got speed. He kind of fits the narrative for what Joe Douglas, looks for is size and speed. And that's something the Jets really haven't had too much of at the wide receiver position overall. So again, to recap, I think we're in a good spot here and there's not too many things they could do that would piss me off.
I would just be wary of that because they always find a way to do something that you don't like. So you brought up a lot of good points, and we got a question in the chat that I wanted to touch on from Kalen Patton. I'm going to put it out here on the screen. Other than offensive line, which position group can the Jets not afford to lose someone in? So this is a tough question in the sense that you have to look at it from two different perspectives. One, how do you look at it today? How do you look at it after the draft? So I would say today, it'd probably be wide receiver just because, Mike Williams is probably not going to be 100% early. And then after that, it's Ellen Lazard, who everybody expects nothing from. And then it's 2 second-year UDFAs who we all like and we think could have potential. But again, you can't bank on that success just because there's not a lot to base it off of. Xavier Gibson literally had a rushing touchdown, a kickoff return touchdown, and a couple catches. He has potential, but we don't know. And Brownlee, I think, had that 1 touchdown in the Washington game, but you can't really do that. I would say it's wide receiver and then probably safety, just because right now they still probably need another safety. Again, this is probably going to change because let's just say they draft the wide receiver at 10, then you feel a lot better because at least you have 3 guys. And, if one of them gets hurt, you have 2 guys. So that's what I would say. And safety, which I do think they're not done adding. Again, if they don't add an offensive lineman in the draft, at least in the first round or second round, if they trade back or whatever it may be, I probably would say that offensive line, but you'd imagine that Bakhtiari is looming. I think that they could get a guy like Andres Pete. I know that's been tossed around as well as an option, but probably today, wide receiver and safety. What do you think?
I would actually, I think it's a little different. I think we spoke on it earlier when you talk about the talent level of the Jets group, but they are very top heavy.
Yes.
And I think if you were to point to one, obviously if Aaron Rodgers goes down for the entire season again, we're in shambles, but you feel better about having Tyrod as opposed to Zach Wilson being his backup. What I would, however, say is even above wide receiver, if Breece Hall goes down, I think that changes the offense so much. I think what he does from a running back perspective, what he proved last year at the tail end of the season behind the worst offensive line in football with the worst quarterback in football, what he did was incredible. And I think he changes the entire dynamic of this offense. I think he
Yep.
opens so much stuff up for the quarterback, for the receivers. I think if you lose him as an offensive weapon, I think that's probably more important than losing any other offensive player outside of Aaron Rodgers. And that's kind of where I would go. That's especially right now, because right now it's Breece Hall, and then Abanikanda. And he was okay. I mean, unproven. So we're going to see what kind of move they make to get a true backup running back. But right now, I'd say that really is Breece Hall in the running back group.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I really wasn't thinking about that because I just feel like, hey, he's an alien. I know obviously we had the trauma of his rookie season being cut short. But yeah, that's an excellent point. I do want to transition to like potential moves that they can make, not the draft. This would just be free agency based on, this later wave, maybe a guy in the summertime, maybe a guy honestly in camp when things kick off. I feel like running back and offensive line are the obvious ones out besides safety, which we do think that they will sign somebody. I don't know who that'll be, but who's somebody you would want them to sign at each position? So a safety, a running back, and an offensive lineman.
I mean, safety, you say you'd love to see them go like big and just go all in, because Tony Adams, I think, was, he was decent. He was pretty good as a starter last year, but I kind of view him more as a third safety. I think Chuck Clark, a healthy Chuck Clark, is going to do a world of difference in this defense, and I'd like to see him at that one starting safety spot. So I'd like to see them go all in and sign like a Quandre Diggs or Justin Simmons. I just think that would prove it and kind of put the cherry on top of this all-in offseason. When you talk about O-line, I mean, you'd like to see them make kind of that veteran addition either on the interior or outside. So like an Andrews Pete or a David Bakhtiari. I think everyone knows it's kind of heading towards Bakhtiari, which I think as a sixth lineman, like everyone should feel pretty good about, right? And then, you always want to receiver and running back are kind of two different outside. I mean, who's left really at receiver? Like my mind goes to Hunter Renfrow because he's a traditional slot, but I just don't know if that mixes with what the Jets do, because they like to have Garrett Wilson as like that chess piece that they can move all around. So I'm not even really sure about, obviously Tyler Boyd's still out there. Like I would love, that's probably, the top guy, like top tier guy that you'd love to see them get is Tyler Boyd, just because of the size that he brings, and that enables you to kind of move Garrett Wilson around more. And then, you from a running back perspective, you hear J.K. Dobbins, that he coming off the Achilles is close with Aaron Rodgers. They did rehab together. You talk about Zeke. Outside of that, but I'd like to see them from a running back perspective. I just always like to have to get someone that doesn't make that running back room redundant. I like people that do things that maybe Breece Hall isn't as great at. So from that perspective, you kind of like someone that maybe is a good short yardage back. And when you think about that, like that's Zeke in a nutshell, right? So I kind of ping-ponged around a little bit, but ultimately I think that's where I'd like to see it shake out. What about you?
Yeah, you hit on a lot of good names. I think I don't feel like Zeke is actually realistic. There's been a lot of smoke about him going back to Dallas, and I feel like that kind of makes sense because they didn't make any moves at running back. They lost Tony Pollard, and I think right now all they have is like Rico Dowdle and the other guy who's like really small. Like, yeah, Deuce Vaughn. I think Dobbins is certainly interesting. Another guy that I like, and I feel like people are probably sleeping on him, but the only thing is he's not necessarily a short yardage guy, but he has a lot of versatility, would be Boston Scott. I think he's shown an ability when you given, the opportunity to get some carries and even some catches out of the backfield that he can be dynamic. He's killed the Giants like every year since he's been in the league. So that's something I kind of like about him, but I think he's interesting. Honestly, I want them to bring back Ashton at safety. I think at this point, when you lose Tony Adams, which you actually haven't, I mean, not Tony Adams, Justin Hardy, excuse me. When you lose Justin Hardy, you need somebody else on specials. Maybe he could be that guy, because I know Irv Charles is definitely another guy that's probably be expected to fill in that role. But we know that Ashton's been really good on specials, and I even think he showed some signs when in a limited role at safety. So I would like for them to bring him back. And then when you're moving to the offensive line, I mean, Bakhtiari seems like that's inevitable at this point. But another guy, and I know that he's lost a lot of weight because he got injured, would be Connor Williams from Miami. He's only 26 years old. I know that he's not going to be ready to play this year, but he's been a productive center. And I know Tippmann's probably locked in at this point at center, but having him as depth and maybe having him later in the season could be interesting. Again, I don't think he's going to be ready to play anytime soon, just based on the reports about the amount of weight he lost. But he's somebody that people don't really talk about as much. And, he's still young. I think getting youth is important. And I know lastly in the chat, a few people were talking about getting a backup cornerback. I know Melton from Rutgers in the draft was someone that was thrown out there, but at this point, I think they feel pretty good about their cornerback room. I would like for them to figure out something with Michael Carter II, just like re-signing him so he's locked in. I've heard people talk about trading DJ Reed. I've heard people talk about extending DJ Reed. I think just having him next year is fine, and then figuring it out later, just because, he's getting older. He's I think he's going to be 27 or 28. And typically when cornerbacks get to 30, that's when the drop-off happens. And a lot of times they'll move to safety because it's an easier position to transition into your 30s with. But that's what I would say in terms of additions. Any thoughts on some of the names I threw out there?
No, I like them. I think you bring up some good points. The other person at running back that has always been, he's on the other side of 30, but he's always been productive and reliable, is Latavius Murray, who I'm not, listen, I mean, he produced, why not? He produces everywhere that he goes. He's been to every single team, but again, he's one that if you're looking for a reliable back that can do all the things that you ask him to do, I think Latavius Murray is something that, you have to at least consider. Outside of that, no. And I think you bring up a good point about the cornerback group. I think you feel really good about Eccles as your top backup. And I think that cornerback room is as set as you're ever going to see, to be honest with you.
I think an interesting guy could be Stephon Gilmore. I don't think he would take a bench role, but he's depth, and he's been a good player. He can get some interceptions, but I don't think that's going to happen. But I figured I'd throw it out there. I was looking at the list of guys who are available. So I do want to leave it with this, and I know this has been a topic of conversation all over Twitter because now we're in the month of April, but when are the new jerseys? I know we know what the white ones look like, but the green, the black, and the change in logo going to happen? Because they teased it on April Fool's Day by putting the Titans, and I thought what they would do is on April 2nd, change it to the new logo. Is April Fool's, this is actually our new logo, but they haven't done it yet. I know there were some people who had conspiracy theories that it would have happened yesterday because that's when they did the 2019 rebrand, but what do you think? Do you think they're going to do it the week leading into the draft? Do you think they're going to just do it out of nowhere? What do you think?
It's got to be in the next 3 weeks. It's got to be before the draft. They can't not do it then. So I think it's probably going to be the week leading up. They're going to draw it out. I mean, the Jets social media team just doesn't miss. They do a very nice job across the board. They tease fans, they toy with fans, they listen to them. It's really good. So I got a feeling it's got to be that Thursday or Friday, or even coming out of that weekend before the draft. That's when it's got to happen. I think we're all excited about the change. I think these the 80s, early 90s throwback unis are clearly top notch. Going back to the Kelly Green is just it's awesome.
Chef's kiss.
Yes, and I want to see what the alternates are going to be. I want to see what they're doing, how the green jerseys look, what the alternates will look like. Will they be black? Will they bring the Titans ones back? Who knows? I mean, I know you've been a proponent of them just because
people hate them.
But you know what? To your point, and you've always said this, is they won with them. From 08 to 2010, they wore them, and they won quite a bit. So, I don't know. I'm excited though, because I want to get that Garrett Wilson number 5. I want to get my son one. I know he's dying to get that jersey too. So I just want him to release him anytime anytime between now and the draft. I'll be happy with.
Yes, I agree. And I think within the next, 10 days, they'll probably be out at this point. We have one last question in the chat before we wrap, and I feel like I'm Joe on the actual Badlands feed, and the show will be on the Badlands feed either later today on Friday or at some point on Saturday. But essentially, do you want the Jets to be pass heavy or run the rock next year? That's from Gyro in the chat.
I think you'd like to see them be obviously like to see them be balanced, but I think what they're going to be is run heavy, and I think they're going to use the run to set up the pass. That's my belief. I think what you saw from Breece Hall last year, I would make an argument that Breece Hall in this offense with Aaron Rodgers at quarterback could be the most productive running back in the league outside of Christian McCaffrey. And I don't think that's a stretch. So I do think they're going to be run first, pass second. But again, you'll see it shake out as close to 50-50 as really possible, maybe with the edge towards the running game. What do you think, Steve?
Yeah, I'm more pass just because I want to see, that Fitzpatrick touchdown record broken. I don't want him to be the leader in Jets single season touchdowns in his whatever. And I just want to see just explosive plays. I know Breece can do that with his, on the ground, but I just want to see Garrett Wilson have 12 touchdowns, and I want some long ones. But again, I like, seeing Breece become a focal point of the offense, and I know he will, and I know he was awesome. I actually saw some early fantasy rankings where he was running back 2 in PPR leagues, which is so cool. Like, Jet players are never like highly touted in fantasy. He was running back 2 and Garrett was wide receiver 8. Like, that's so awesome. Like,
it is.
Thinking about like where we've been as a franchise in our lifetime, especially during fantasy football, like they've never been considered anything, as a franchise to give viable options in fantasy football. But
what's crazy to think though is that like we could both be right. Like the Jets could be a run first team, but Aaron Rodgers could still put up, 35 touchdowns this year. I mean, there's a realistic world where that actually happens. Like the Jets offense could be a top 10 unit in the NFL and be able to do both of those things where Breece Hall runs for 1,400 yards and Garrett Wilson catches 12 touchdowns. What a world that would be, right? I mean, it's not far out of the realm of possibility to assume that could happen.
Yeah, it's true. Any closing thoughts before we hang it up?
No, this has been fun, man. I love getting back and chopping it up with you. I think it's been a good offseason after a rocky start to it, right? And there's been things that have happened that have been really good for the Jets. So it's exciting, and let's turn the page towards the draft and see what happens come April 25th.
Yes, I know it's coming by soon, but thanks everybody who tuned in the live stream, whether it was on Twitter or YouTube. Thank you to anybody who listened on the Badlands feed. We really appreciate it. Make sure to subscribe to this channel, youtube.com/@BadlandsTOJ. And I'd imagine that most of you who have tuned in are probably Badlands Patreons, but now's the time. Draft Guide's coming out. A lot of good podcasts every single day. It's literally every day. You have something, whether it's video, audio, or even getting some more articles, being mixed in the fold. But it's been great. And don't forget to check out the draft party. It's going to be at Reds near MetLife Stadium. I don't think I'll be able to attend, nor will Russo, but I know a bunch of the other Badlands TOJ crew will be there. Should be fun. I know there's going to be a live podcast. There'll be some stuff given away. But we appreciate everybody who tuned in, and we'll talk to you guys soon.